Amazing. Thank you. I'm so excited to be here. So, like Christina said, I'm head of content marketing at Zapier. I've actually only been there for 6 months. Prior to Zapier, I was director of marketing at a company called Campaign Monitor, which is an email marketing platform. Zapier, for those of you who don't know, is a leader in automation for businesses. So our work is all about helping people work smarter and not harder. And we connect over 3,000 apps to help people automate complex or tedious tasks. So it's been a really fun company to jump into as a content marketer because Zapier actually doesn't have a sales team. So it's all self-serve. And that means that content is actually responsible for driving revenue for the business. And because of that, content has always been seen as really important, which it is. But I know that company to company, it doesn't always have the reputation it deserves. And so in those 6 months, I've been leading a team of writers and editors in figuring out not only how to maintain success, but to get Zapier to the next level of growth through content.
Awesome. And that's so exciting that content has played such a powerful part in the business from the get-go. So, and that you've got a lot of buy-in there. That's very cool.
Yeah, it's amazing. Zapier's, the growth that they've experienced can be sort of traced back at every level to SEO and content. So that's pretty amazing.
Oh, that's very cool. Yeah. And I love Zapier. Zapier. I keep pronouncing it Zapier. It's Zapier as a tool.
Okay, I have to be honest. When I was interviewing, I had to look up the pronunciation, and I still sometimes have to tell myself in my head, Zapier rhymes with happier, and that's how I remember it.
That's a nice way of doing it. Noted for the rest of this session. All right, I will kick off with a first question. So it'd be good to know how your current content team is structured and how you got to that point and the order in which you hired.
Yeah, absolutely. This is a really interesting time to be talking about this because I actually just created a new team structure after being here for 6 months and sort of learning what was working, what wasn't working. So I'll start by saying how the team was structured when I started. And that was very much based on content type. So we had a team that was dedicated to the blog, and then a team that was dedicated to sort of everything else. We called them content services. And so they would be taking in requests like for ebooks, for email copy, for landing page copy, not only from our team and marketing, but from outside of marketing. So if a customer service manager needed something, if our experts program needed curriculum, and that worked really well for a while. So one, the blog has been a huge traffic driver and a huge source of Zapier's success and growth. So we didn't really want to mess with anything there. And then content services was a bit of a solution for this question of how do we handle all of the content and writing needs that exist outside of content marketing. But the reason that I kind of revisited that structure was it did put content in a very much of production mode. Like it was very request based, almost like an in-house agency. But what that meant was that we weren't really seen as strategic leaders, and where my philosophy when it comes to content marketing is content should be at the table for those big strategy decisions and have a voice in where we go with our marketing, because content's really the fuel that drives any marketing strategy, any demand gen or lead gen, all the above. And the team was feeling that too. Our team is absolutely like the best group of writers and editors I've ever worked with. So talented. The quality of the content they put out is absolutely amazing. And they were kind of feeling like, I would love to have a voice in the strategy. I have a ton of ideas here about what we could be doing better or new ideas to try or content experiments to run. So I wanted to bridge that gap by really helping position content as these strategy leaders within the company. So the content structure that I just rolled out kind of takes a different approach. So instead of doing it by content type, it's structured by audience and goal. So we're going to have one content sort of sub team, which is called audience growth. And their number one focus is driving qualified traffic. So that's where the blog, the editorial calendar, our SEO experts, our conversion rate optimization work is being done. And they're really going to be aligned with the other teams in marketing that are focused on acquisition. So think like growth marketing, demand gen, working with them to figure out how can we get as many people and qualified people as possible to the website and get them to sign up. And so they own that part of the journey. And then the second sub team kind of takes over from there. We're calling them education and enablement. And what they're responsible for is, once we get that traffic to the site, how do we put them in a position where they can be successful with the product? So how can we create really great, compelling educational content? How can we think about conversion? So from the point of signing up to the point of becoming a paying customer, where does content fit into that journey? And how can we really help them along and eventually set them up to be like lifetime customers, or really have a long and successful run with Zapier? And then the third piece of the puzzle for our content structure is that we also have a video team, which sits under content marketing. And they are truly jacks of all trade, where they're doing event video, advertising, customer stories, educational content, which is really cool. And they're covering the full range of the customer journey. So that's a high level view, and we can dig in a little deeper, but that's what it looks like now that we've updated it.
I love that shift from the content teams being told what to do, and now they have very clear focused goals, forcing them all to be strategic and giving them more autonomy. And then that layer of the video people, which is probably just going to bring all your content to the next level, just having that, being able to make everything video first as well. That's very cool.
Exactly. Yeah. And it also reflects a move into multimedia, whereas a lot of the work we've been doing has been written. Like, we have thousands of written articles, right? But I think you and I probably both experienced this, that we aren't always looking for just like a long article to read. Maybe we want a video, maybe we want something even more interactive, like a quiz or a landing page that we can kind of like play around with. So we're trying to think about expanding content beyond just the written format and experimenting with all these other ways to reach people.
Yeah, it's a nice way to doing it, to having that dedicated resource, because everyone always wants those fancy different types of content, but then there's always that problem with the resource, but you've dedicated time to that.
Exactly.
And I was going to ask, what made you come up with that structure? Were you speaking to other people in content to help you come up with that idea? Did you come up with it yourself? What was that process to get to that point?
Yeah. So I knew that the structure needed to change, but I wanted to chat with other leaders in the content industry, just because I don't know, you kind of have your one view of how things work in your company, but I wanted to see how are other leaders addressing these same questions and challenges. So I actually put a call out on Twitter, which has been an amazing resource for me to connect with other content marketers. And I just said, hey, is anybody up for chatting about content marketing team structures? And so I ended up having a couple sessions over the course of like a week or two with folks from Shopify, HubSpot, Eventbrite, Drift, just to understand, how are you thinking about this? And that was really helpful, because I noticed that depending on the sort of size and maturity of the content team, there was this theme of like starting out really scrappy. And this might be the situation that a lot of the folks here are in, where you have a smaller, like maybe 2 to 3 person content team. And at that point, you do kind of need everybody to be a generalist and be able to jump in on anything that needs to be done. But as content teams got more mature or like more sophisticated, I noticed them going toward that goal-based model of structuring the team. And that was really like an aha moment for me, because like I said, Zapier content has gotten us to where we are today, but the way that we've been approaching it needs to change and expand and become more experimental in order to get us to the next level of growth. So I talked to content leaders outside of the company. I had meetings with internal stakeholders, so other team leaders outside of content, to just ask them, what's working for you with the way content is operating right now? What opportunities do you see? And taking all of that input to sort of shape the new structure. And then of course, like I had a ton of meetings with the existing content team, because when it comes to restructure or even changing the way that the team operates, I think you have to be really considerate that we don't want to just change for change's sake. We want to make sure that we clearly identified the problems we're trying to solve, and then propose this new structure that addresses them and get the team on board and excited with it. So talking to the existing team was also pivotal.
Yeah, that's such an important element, just actually listening and speaking to your team beforehand.
Yes.
Such a common thing that leaders do. It's just like, this is your new role, this is your new responsibility, and then you get so much pushback. So that's a nice approach that you had there.
Exactly. And like I said, our team is so talented and so smart that they should have a hand in shaping how we operate and what our strategy is. And so I was really, really grateful that they were willing to jump in and sort of roll up their sleeves and talk it through with me.
So I've got a question going back from maybe even before your Zapier times from Molly, who's asking, any tips for defining and hiring your very first content hire outside of yourself?
Yes. So I remember this phase well, when it was just like content team of one, or the team is sort of not built out yet, but you're responsible for figuring out what the hiring plan is now. And then you're probably mapping it out into the future too. So when you start out as a content team of one, you're pretty much doing it all, right? You're writing, you're editing, you're creating the strategy, you're working with freelancers and vendors. And in order to grow and really advance the content program, I think what you need to do is carve out time for you as a content leader to have time to think about strategy and long-term vision. So I think the first hire, and in my experience, I'm thinking back to Campaign Monitor, which is starting the content team there from scratch after some turnover. My first hires were doers, so folks who wanted to write, they were true content writers. Their titles were content specialist. But in hiring, I also wanted to make sure that they had the interest in growing their strategy muscles, people management in the future, definitely freelancer and vendor management being something that I knew I would want to be able to delegate to that first hire, those first couple hires. And if you don't have a separate SEO team, which is actually how Zapier is structured, we have a separate SEO team that we sort of dotted line into to figure out our editorial plan. If you don't have that resource, I would say that your first hire, as well as being a writer, would also need to have some level of background in SEO, because that is the foundation upon which a successful content strategy is built. And honestly, also screening for enthusiasm and that desire to learn and grow. I think that has been the thing that's made my most successful hires the most effective, is that they might not come in with the full range of skills that they need, but they have the ability to be curious, to ask questions, and to kind of take what I call an experimentation mindset, which is that not everything has to work, but we want to learn and gain insights from everything we try so that we're building our arsenal of things that will work over time.
Yeah, that's such a key skill, is someone that's got that curiosity to learn, and then everything else becomes so much easier.
Exactly. Yeah. To me, that's the number one thing I'm looking for in interviews and hiring every time.
And what about in terms of using freelancers or agencies, or would you go straight to that full-time content person as your first resource?
So if you have the headcount and it's just you, I would absolutely hire that first person, that first content specialist. Depending on budget and just your ability to hire, I'm a big fan of freelancers. And I've worked both with agencies and freelancers. My preference is always to go with that individual freelance writer, because I found that it's so much easier to build the relationship, train them. I mean, you do invest upfront, especially if you have a product like Zapier, which requires a little bit of onboarding for somebody to be able to write effectively about it. If you're willing to invest that training upfront, then you have a freelancer who oftentimes is more affordable, more agile in the sense of you can ramp up. If you have a really busy month, you can ramp down. And I do find them they move a lot more quickly than agencies. So that's my preference. I know plenty of people who've had experience with agencies that have been great. So every content team I've led has this strong bench of freelancers who we trust, we have relationships with. And that way, even if you do have that team of 2 or 3 or even 4, being able to scale up your content production without putting that all on the shoulders of the folks that you have in-house I think it's kind of the only way to grow your content program in a sustainable way that isn't causing burnout of your existing team. So I'm a big fan of freelancers. I do tend to have them write generally more top of funnel or more general types of articles. The more specific we get about the product, the more I prefer to have that done by in-house folks who really understand the ins and outs and how we talk about our product, how we message it. But especially for the editorial, top of funnel blog content, I think freelancers are an amazing resource.
Yeah, that's a good distinction for using them more for the top of funnel stuff. And then, because there's only so much they can grasp about the product without having spent lots of time in that product, I guess.
Exactly.
Some questions coming through here on the chat. Let's see. So Danny Mansfield, hi Danny, is asking, with your new structure, how do you prioritize incoming requests versus self-determined ideas?
That's a great question, Danny. And that's something I am definitely thinking through right now. This is what I've noticed. And I'd be curious if anybody else has this experience too. The less there's a clear and documented content strategy, the more just random requests you get of people across marketing or even outside of marketing trying to sort of run their own initiatives where everybody's moving in a lot of different directions, trying to get things done. I found that the strength of content is unifying all those efforts and saying, hey, here's our content strategy. We're going to create, let's say, these 3 pillar content campaigns throughout the year. And we want every effort, like demand generation, customer success, partner marketing, to sort of spin off of those key content campaigns. So instead of having like 20 requests come in, you proactively are thinking about, okay, we need to create a content campaign that serves the needs of all of these different functions throughout the organization. And I'll give an example, and this is from the Campaign Monitor days. We created this email marketing benchmarks report, which is basically if you're an email marketer and you're Googling email open rates for nonprofits, you kind of want to know how you're stacking up against the competition and if you're performing well. And we found that was a really great sweet spot where we not only were able to pull all of our proprietary data as content or as an email marketing platform to say, like, here's a list of 20 industries and what their average open rates are, average click-through rates. And that alone was a great as an SEO magnet. I mean, there was a ton of traffic that would go there, but we took it the next step further and built out all these different content assets from that could be used by our sales team for generating new leads. It could be used by our customer marketing team to help people adopt features of the product that would have helped them increase their email marketing benchmarks. And the beauty of that campaign, and kind of what I'm trying to recreate every other content strategy, is that it really was this cornerstone content that we were able to spin out. So going back to Danny's question, my intention for the long-term content strategy is that it becomes a lot more unified and there aren't as many miscellaneous requests coming in because we're proactively building that into our content plan. That being said, those requests always come in, and our plan is really we have an intake form that it maps directly to our Asana, which is our project management system. And so as those come in, we do kind of have a workflow, which includes automation, to assign it to the right team based on, like, does this project align with audience growth? Is it more about acquisition? Or does it align more with something like education and enablement? It's more about helping customers succeed with our product. And that's how we route it to the right team.
Nice process there. And of course, using Zapier to filter that through.
Yes, of course.
I think there was an adjacent question to a similar one from Tom. Yeah, Tom Bangay was asking, how do you staff non-core tasks that often get lumped into the content team at scaling a business, e.g. PR, events, social? They can be serviced with contractors, but at a loss of quality.
Yeah, I think this is a great question. The way that we look at it is that most of those things we do consider them core content tasks. So for instance, today, when I get off this call, we are hosting our first Zap Connect, which is a conference that we're running for Zapier users. And so a huge focus for content over the past 6+ months has been creating the content strategy for that event. So not only what's the programming going to be, what's the email outreach and promotion going to look like, but also once the event's over, how are we going to take a lot of that event content and translate it into blog posts, videos, a library where people can access that after the event's over. So same goes for PR and social media. Those are all things that we build into the content strategy and consider part of our core function. Now, some things like marketing design, some other social tasks, we definitely try to draw boundaries for where it makes sense for us to jump in and where we really want to work cross-functionally with our partners on the marketing team to get those things done. One other thing I'll say about social and PR. So on Zapier's team, we have content sits under content and comms. and comms does include PR and social. And I found such good success with combining those efforts. So going back to the idea of a cornerstone content campaign, PR, we know media loves like data-driven reports, any sort of statistics or customer stories that are really compelling for an article. Those things also perform really well in content. So my preference is always to have content, comms, social, events, PR working in lockstep. And again, like figuring out how to create a strategy that's pointing us all in the same direction, where we can take advantage of whatever assets are being created. That requires a lot of cross-functional collaboration, a lot of good communication, and just visibility into what other teams are working on.
Yeah, that idea of everyone just working towards that same thing instead of the different goals and then asking for favors from each other, that sounds like it's worth the effort of that extra communication.
Yeah, I definitely think so, although it's never easy, but it's definitely worth it.
Yeah. Okay, good question from Natasha. How do you tackle underperforming staff, and best way to boost morale? How do you handle progression?
Well, so I'll start with the progression and this idea of career paths within content, because I think that, I personally love professional development. I love learning. I love growth. Zapier gives us amazing resources, including coaching, both internal and external. We get a budget for learning and development. So it's definitely something I think the company attracts people who are really excited about their own growth and not just satisfied with status quo. Like they want to constantly be bringing on new skills, getting to the next level of their career. And that's how I feel too. Within content, I've noticed that there are a couple different things that we do to make sure people feel like they have a path that suits their growth goals. One is that we have designated paths for ICs, individual contributors. So that's people who don't want to manage a team, but they really want to focus on excelling in their craft, whether that's writing or editing. And then we do have paths for people management. So if the next step in your career is to take on a direct report or start managing freelancers with eventually like an eye toward managing a team yourself, we have those two paths. And we actually have those charted out in really great detail. It's probably the most structured career progression paths that I've seen at a company that I've worked at. And I love it because it really allows the writer or the team member to take their growth into their own hands and say like, hey, I'm sitting down, I'm looking at my 1, 3, 5-year growth goals. And I think this puts me on this path. Now, how can I work with my manager to get there? So maybe that's getting exposed to new experiences, taking on new projects, branching out into a skill set that you're not as comfortable in, but you want to grow. And that's amazing. So that's the IC versus people management piece of it. And then there's also the sort of paths within content marketing. The way I look at it is one, editorial, where you're really focusing on like creating almost like a media or publication type approach to your blog. That's something that we definitely do on the Zapier blog, and something that if you look at our top of funnel content, it really is a productivity, remote work, figuring out how to work smarter, not harder. You're not going to see mentions of our product. We hire and have hired a lot of former journalists and editors at publications for that reason. And I think it really shows in the quality of our content. So that's one path, is editorial. You really want to focus on creating publication that's a destination for people who are interested in these topics. The second path is more content strategy. So this is for the folks who are really interested in data, in strategy, in content marketing, and figuring out what levers we can pull to take that traffic that our editorial team is driving and really figure out how we can connect them with the resource or the part of the product that's most valuable to them. And then the third path is maybe you want to eventually grow out of content marketing. And, that was my experience at Campaign Monitor. I started as a content marketer and eventually had a director of marketing role where I was really overseeing a much broader or more generalist set of responsibilities. And that was an amazing experience. Now, I did come back to content because I love content and always will, but there are people on the team who might be interested in getting into marketing programs or event marketing or maybe demand gen. So we want to make sure that those paths are available to them. And that's something that we chart out and then have recurring one-on-ones and growth conversations with the team. So that's sort of the career progression and career pathing that we have. So to Natasha's question about tackling underperforming staff or boosting morale. It's not something I have a ton of experience with at Zapier because it is such a talented and motivated team. In general, I would say one, knowing where that person wants to go, like what their growth path is, and sort of helping them see, here's the level you're performing at now, and here's where you need to be if you want to get to that next level. So can we break down some concrete steps to get you there, get you the experience you need? Zapier also offers coaching training, which I've been taking, which I love because it really helps put the responsibility on the team member to take control of their own performance and growth. So making sure expectations are clear and then coaching them to help them get there has been one of the best paths I've found. And then best way to boost morale. I mean, that is a big question, especially I don't know, especially with the pandemic and people working from home, all the different factors that are causing people to feel burnt out or just like not as engaged. It's honestly an equation I think a lot of people are trying to solve. Some things that have worked for me, and this is not a comprehensive list at all, but one, making sure the team feels like they have a voice in any big decisions that are being made. So we talked about the content team structure. One thing I think made it really successful, the rollout of that to the team, is that it wasn't handed down as a dictate, like this is how it's going to be and just deal with it. It was handed down as, hey, we've heard that these are the problems you're experiencing. These are some of the goals we're trying to meet with this new team structure. What do you think? Like, does this solve the problems? Are there tweaks you would suggest? And then treating it as sort of a work in progress as we figure out how to get where we need to go as a team. So I think that having a sense of agency and engagement is one of the keys to boosting morale. And then there are fun things like we're a fully remote company, so we don't have an office. And a lot of our socializing happens in Slack. So we have automated like water cooler prompts every Friday that just ask, hey, what are you doing this weekend? And some other random question. Who do you want to give a shout out to? And that might seem kind of silly or easy, but it does really help the team feel connected. So those are just two examples that came to mind.
Nice little snippets there. I was going to ask a question when you were saying about the career progression and all the different paths. As a manager, how does that work on a more like weekly basis or monthly basis? How do you help people stay on track with the goals? Are you having regular check-ins? What does that look like?
Yeah, so we have our weekly one-on-ones, obviously, but those are a lot more focused on, what's on your mind, what roadblocks are you running into, how can I help you, clear those. We actually specifically have separate growth conversations. So monthly, like 1 hour long conversations that are focused just on that person's growth, things they're trying to learn, skills they're trying to develop, which I love because it really lets both the team member and the manager get in the mindset of, okay, we're not doing project management. We're not dealing with urgent fires. We're really setting aside this time to think about this person's long-term growth. And as a manager, that's absolutely one of my favorite things to do. We have, again, like quite a structured process for documenting a growth plan and setting milestones. And so once we figure out as manager and direct what your goal is for, let's say, a year from now, maybe it's a promotion, we'll break that down into individual milestones. So one milestone might be like take a course in SEO, to get to the next level. And then we'll check in each month to see, have you made progress on this milestone? Can we mark this one as complete? Are there any that you want to add or remove? So it really does have the accountability. Whereas in the past, I'm sure we've all experienced like, yeah, we'll talk about a promotion like down the line. At Zapier, and I think in the structure we have, it's a lot more detailed and something that both the manager and the direct has a really clear view of what needs to get done and how we're going to get there.
Wow, it sounds like they're very impressively structured with all things career growth for everyone. That's such a good structure.
Yeah, I love it.
Question here from Sarah. What kind of reporting do you use or do regularly to justify your content team? It sounds like you aren't needing it, but for businesses that aren't yet content advocates.
Yeah. So for justifying the content team, it's true that I will say all of the leaders I work for and CMOs especially have seen the value of content. And honestly, I think if you're in the data, it's pretty clear, content is a huge traffic driver. And we know traffic is that like big number at which the conversion starts to happen. So the more you can do that, the better. The metrics that we report on, just to start there, are, we try to keep it narrowed down. We have monthly business reviews and the quarterly business reviews where we try and choose a few key metrics to report on, because that's what gets shared out to leadership and then to the exec level too. And we've gone back and forth on what those are, but I can tell you right now, the things we report on are 1, traffic, 2, clicks into our main CTAs. So for our content, the things that we want people to do ultimately are sign up for Zapier, or if they're already a customer, click into the editor. So as an example, we have things called Zap templates where we can suggest within a blog article, like, hey, try this. And you can click in, go ahead and set it up. It's really easy. So we're looking at the number of clicks into those CTAs, because that tells us that the traffic we're driving is also qualified and interested in engaging with the product, which is always important. And then we also look at last touch signups. We have like a pretty robust attribution model that can look at first touch signups, last touch session start. We use Looker for this. And we decided to look at last touch signups because that's a session in which content was one of the last things somebody did before they signed up. So to us, that's a good indicator of content is driving signups, which is therefore driving revenue. And when we're thinking about making the case, say, for more headcount or more content budget, those are the things that our leadership and execs are really going to care about. And then we also report on, we call them commits, but it's things that are 100% in our control. Because when it comes to traffic, yes, we can create amazing content, but there will always be things that cause traffic trends to change. COVID being a great example. We actually saw a huge spike in traffic because of all of our content around remote work. And at the same time, like over the summer holiday, we see traffic dip. So we don't always have full control over that, but what we do have control over is the number of content pieces we produce. And that's something else we report on. So here's the types of content we're going to produce, and here's what we're committed to doing in terms of volume, both top of funnel and mid funnel. So those are all the things that we report on regularly. You might need to remind me of the second part of that question if I didn't answer it.
I think you made me cover, yeah, you covered that. I think very closely connected. You sort of said what KPIs you use to measure the effectiveness, but effectiveness, actually, I think you've covered that. I'm not gonna answer that.
Yeah, I guess just that last part of helping build content advocates, there is, I think for a leader that doesn't already understand the importance of content, there is a level of like advocating and educating that you have to do with them. Mm-hmm. And I've definitely had the mindset of like, they should just see this, it should be obvious. But when it's not, you do kind of have to market your content marketing to these leaders. Like some things, or we'll pull data for in advance of a presentation is like, what percentage of all signups, for instance, for Zapier, does content drive? How does that translate to revenue? Like if you can calculate that down funnel impact of, however many thousands of dollars, to me, those are really compelling and very hard to argue with numbers to put in front of execs. If your content program is a little bit more nascent and you're just getting it off the ground, then pulling case studies from other businesses like yours to see what impact they've had with content. And that's another good opportunity, like we were talking about earlier, to reach out to content leaders at companies maybe of your size or a little bit bigger to say, when you scaled up content, what results did you see? Even if they're not willing to give like the exact revenue numbers, maybe they can give you percentage growth. And then you can take that back to your leadership and say, this company or this competitor, this is just like us, increased content production by 50%, and they saw a 150% increase in this down funnel metric. So pull the data from where you can, and if you don't have it in your own system, don't be afraid to reach out to your colleagues, because I know in my experience, they're always happy to help.
That's a really good tip, to use your competitors' data, because leaders are always just going to be very obsessed with what the competitors are doing. So if they're doing
it, right. And if you can't get competitors, then some sort of similar type of company.
Let's see some of these. Okay, question from Julia Turbiglio. She's in a small but growing content team. Someone passing from individual contributor to people manager, at what point is it reasonable for them to scale back their content production input to only focus on strategy and people management?
I would say sooner than you think. sooner than you think. That's based on my experience going from an IC to a people manager. I found myself like holding on really tightly to, okay, I am taking all these new responsibilities on. I'm going to be managing a team. I'm going to be setting strategy. I'm going to be working cross-functionally and advocating to leadership for content. But I also felt like, but I still have to write. That's why I got into this, and I can't let that go. Like, and what ended up happening, just to be completely honest, is I did a not great job of writing things that I committed to until it finally clicked for me. Okay, in order to progress, since I do want to become a people manager and lead a team, I'm going to have to leave behind some of those IC tasks that I loved and that were what got me into it in the first place. Coming to grips with that might be a little challenging, but I would say both you and your team will be better off if you make a plan to offload those responsibilities sooner rather than later. I would say the caveat is that that doesn't mean just handing them all off to your one content specialist or whatever the team is, but really thinking about, okay, I can't do this anymore. This person's capacity is, X pieces per month. How can we supplement that with freelancers, with outsourcing it? Can we bring in freelance writers? Can we bring in freelance editors? So it's really kind of trying to set up a structure that, again, is going to support sustainable growth for your content team and isn't going to lead to you burning out or doing half-baked work, which, like I said, that's what I did. Would not recommend it. Yeah, definitely.
Yeah, good answer. I can see that's a temptation for a lot of content marketers to cling on to that execution.
Exactly. I felt it. And I do miss parts of it, but it's a trade-off.
Do you feel like at all that you miss out on learning the latest trends and feel conscious about that, or have you've got used to it at this point once you let go of it?
I mean, the way I think about being a manager, and especially now that I'm not just managing content marketers, but I'm also managing like video producers and editors. I'm never going to be the expert that my video team lead is, right? Like it's not my background. And as a manager, I think your job isn't to know everything, but it's to be able to coach the experts on your team to be successful. Mm-hmm. So that's another learning experience for me, is being able to release the need to know every detail of what's happening in the content marketing industry or on every project that we're running, and really just think about how to set my team members up for success. But I do try and stay tuned in to what's going on in the content industry, and Twitter and events like this are honestly some of my go-tos.
That's a really refreshing distinction, to just free your mind of feeling that you need to know everything.
Yeah.
Trusting your team. I'll ask a couple more before I leave some time for you to go through some of the content roles that you mentioned. So maybe one more. I actually think you've answered all of those ones that I'm scrolling through there to see if there's any more here. How do you structure a freelance team to discover the best writers?
So we don't necessarily look at it as a freelance team, or just like individual freelancers that we work with. What we typically do is Zapier. People love our content, which I can't take credit for because I've only been there for 6 months. Mm-hmm. But because of that, we do have a lot of freelancers who are interested in writing for us. So we have a pretty great system where people can apply to become a freelancer. Oftentimes, if they seem like they'll be a good fit, we will ask them to do an assignment, obviously a paid assignment, just to see how it works, how they capture our voice and tone. And at that point, our managing editors will make the decision of, hey, this person seems like they could be a really good fit long-term. Let's get them into the rotation of assigning them out content as we have it. The key to making freelancers work, besides just sourcing freelancers who are really talented and can capture the content well, is training, like we talked about, making sure that they have at least a baseline knowledge of our style guide, our voice guidelines, as well as the product itself and how we talk about it. And then the second piece is documentation and processes. Like, I think any freelancer that doesn't have really clear deadlines and expectations is kind of being set up for failure. And that's one thing our team does really well, is provides documentation. We have a really clean process for getting the copy in, starting with macro edits, like thematically, this is right or wrong, or here's where we would want to shift it, coming back for that second round of review, and then doing micro edits. So that's where we go into the grammar and all of the detailed work. Again, we use our project management system, and we even do things as seemingly simple, but so helpful as we've built our style guide into Grammarly, which is a plugin that I'm sure plenty of people are aware of. So even when I'm like typing out a document, like thoughts for this event, it prompts me like, hey, this isn't part of the Zapier style guide. Do you want to make this change? So there's a mix of finding the right people, but also building in the tools and processes to help them be successful.
Oh, it sounds like a freelancer's dream, just having all that information actually there and actual processes.
That's the hope, definitely.
Okay, I'll ask one final question that's come through from Rebecca. Could you share any examples of how you've adjusted your content strategy in response to something you've noticed in your metrics?
That's a great question. So one example that comes to mind, which I kind of mentioned before, was that huge spike of traffic related to COVID and people starting to work from home. Our traffic just skyrocketed, which you would think would be a great thing, but there wasn't a commensurate increase in our signups or some of those key conversion points that we wanted to see. So what that told us is that even though these articles on remote work, like how to, even something as simple as how to set up a meeting on Zoom, were really valuable, and they were answering a question that people had, that didn't overlap as much with our target audience, which would be people who have a need to not only use Zoom, but connect it with Google Calendar or whatever it might be. So that was really interesting, and actually did cause us, after we kind of created a comprehensive library of remote work. But after that, we pulled back on that type of content just because we had the answers out there for people who needed it. And that, of course, is important to us, being of value and answering questions, especially at a time where people were kind of panicking about how to do some of these things. But for our long-term content strategy, it didn't make sense for us to continue to invest in that type of content, just because it didn't contribute to our down funnel goals, our goals as a content team, as a marketing team, and as an organization. So that's one example. Another example is with Zapier. If any of y'all have been in it, I know we've had some people say they're fans. There is a little bit of a learning curve where you kind of want some guidance on, okay, I'm in, maybe I set up one Zap, what should I do next? And we did find in the content that what should I do next question is when we saw people really trying to answer. We have tutorials, we have we call it automation inspiration, like here's how other companies are using automation. But we decided to experiment with something that was even more guided and interactive. So we just recently released, we call it a use case quiz. So it's basically like, find your use case. And it's a quiz that asks you to basically identify what the most tedious or boring or just like waste of time task you do at work is. And then ask you a couple more questions about like what your job is and what kind of tools you use. And then it recommends a Zap. So you can just click right through and set that Zap up. And what we saw in the data is that really answered a question that our users and prospective users had, which is like, I know Zapier is really valuable. Like people rave about it, but how do I use it? Like, how do I really get that value out of it? And the content data allowed us to create a content experience that answered that question for them. And we've seen amazing results so far.
Oh, that quiz sounds brilliant. I'm going to check that out afterwards.
Yeah, I know. I need to grab that link.
Yeah, if you've got the link, I'm sure a lot of us, it's very enticing. Just put in your most rubbish tasks and
we'll take care of them.
So I'll leave a bit of time now for you to share the job roles that you mentioned, but thank you so much for all your insightful answers. I'm sure everyone will agree that was insanely useful.
Thank you. I love talking about this stuff. So I appreciate the opportunity. Yeah, and so I am hiring 2 content marketing manager roles right now. I'm going to drop the links into the chat. The first one is called the content marketing manager of audience growth. And that's that first team that we talked about, which will be really focused on driving qualified traffic. And we'll also be managing a team of people. And then the second role is also a content marketing manager, dropping the link there. And we're calling them the content marketing manager for education and enablement, which is that second sub team, thinking about conversion and helping people be successful with the product. So if you have any interest in the roles, please reach out. If you know anybody who would be a great fit, I would love to speak with them. These people will be working very closely with me. So I'm very excited about these hires.
Sounds like amazing opportunities there. Are they UK friendly, or is it more US time zones?
We're a global company, but the majority of the team is in the US. So if somebody from the UK wanted to join, we do have a team member who's in London. There might be just some time shifting needed, but we can definitely answer all those questions if for the right candidate.
Okay, that's really good to know. And thank you so much again. Yeah, brilliant. Lots of, Sarah said, great to hear your experience, Lane. Thanks for answering our questions. Lots of thank yous coming through. So I think everyone enjoyed that.
Amazing. Thank you. I enjoyed it too.